Never before, I mean, we've had wars forever. Never before in the history of mankind did we see such successful, systematic genocide as we saw in the Western Hemisphere when the first explorers came. Secondly, and part of that, at the same time, was the subjugation of the peoples in Africa and Asia. This is not an accident. This is part and parcel of what happened. Go back and read your history. This is how they gained enough money to build the big textile mills. This is what the Industrial Revolution was based on. It didn't have to be based on that, but this is what it was based on. The wealth of Europe was built on taking land in the Western Hemisphere, on depopulating Africa through the slave trade, on subjugating India and Asia, on carving up what we now call the Third World. Why? Because we said, they said, those people are inferior. The question of racism, then, cannot be divorced from this history. This is why it is that a worker from Jamaica, no matter how long they stay in Canada, is treated differently than a worker from Poland, or a worker from Yugoslavia, or a worker from Italy. This is why. It's not just that people come as new immigrants to a country and they don't speak the language. Listen, when the labor movement was first organized, most of the folks didn't speak English. Now, I know the British try to pretend that everybody speaks English, but see, when the labor movement was first organized, even here in Ontario, there were lots of workers who spoke Polish, or Lithuanian, or Italian, or Portuguese, that are part of the history of this labor movement. And there were organizers who spoke those languages, and there were labor newspapers written in those languages, and the union meetings before we could afford Port Elgins were held in those halls and in those churches when labor didn't own a hall anywhere in the country. Those communities are part of that history, part of why we're here today. Racism, then, is critical to how capitalism functions. First, by allowing and justifying the expropriation of most of the world for one small part and even one small group within that part of the world. Secondly, by continuing to justify the exploitation of the bulk of the world. And by creating, in Canada, especially in the United States, but all over the world, by creating false divisions, by dividing us as a family, as a class, among each other. You see, racism is not really an oversight. It's not an accident. It's not like the ideals of Canada or the ideals of democracy somehow went astray. It's not like that. It didn't happen that way. When the U.S. Constitution was written, they were very clear that we weren't people. We counted as 3/5 of a person. U.S. Constitution. 3/5. We couldn't vote either, but we counted as 3/5 of a person. Not an accident. A deliberate, carefully planned strategy. So when we talk about racism as a problem, when we listen to brothers and sisters talk about issues in their locals, we have to ask ourselves, who does racism benefit? Why was it invented? And who does it serve? It doesn't serve us. It serves the bosses, the ruling class. That's who it serves. That's what it was invented for. They are the ones who propagated it. They are the ones who continue to benefit from it. It was used and it is still used as justification for raping the world. And today in Canada, it is used as the major weapon for keeping us divided. It is the primary strategy of our enemy. Make no mistake about it, it's their number one weapon, their strongest and most powerful tool. As long as they can continue to teach generation after generation that racism has some currency, some value, as long as they continue to convince us that somehow we have nothing in common with each other, then they will continue to be on top. That is what we mean when we talk about racism being institutionalized, being systemic to Canada. You see, it's not an issue of individual morality. One brother said earlier he wasn't interested in people liking him. That's not the issue. The issue is understanding what it is that our enemy uses against us and how we can change that. Certainly racism uses tools with which we're all familiar: fear, ignorance, stereotypes, language differences, prejudice. All of these things are used. But fundamentally, its major use is to prop up capitalism. And if, in fact, we want to guarantee the simple things we have fought for in labor, then we will understand that we cannot guarantee any of those things unless we deal with racism. And while it's important that we understand that racism only benefits the ruling class, that they are the ones who have invented it, and they are the ones who continue to teach it, and it's in that spirit that the OFL slogan, "Racism hurts everyone," is correct. It's also critical that we understand that racism does not hurt everyone equally. It hurts everyone in this room, but not equally. Racism is like a flood that you can't turn back. It seeps in all the cracks and crevices. Wherever there isn't someone on guard, it comes in. Because it is so much a part of our society. That's why it's so critical that human rights committees exist in every local and that they be active. It's critical that you stop and ask yourself at every point, are we dealing with racism? Are we fighting racism? Because it is the norm in this country. And if you're not actively fighting it, you can be sure that it's at work, weakening your union, weakening your local, causing trouble. We can do this. We can meet this challenge. We've done it before on other issues.